Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue. Je m'appelle Steve Staples. Je suis le président de l'Institut Rideau. Welcome, I'm Steve Staples. I'm the president of the Rideau Institute, and the Rideau Institute, along with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, represented by their executive director Bruce Campbell here today, are both pleased to present researchers Professor Michael Byers and Stewart Webb as they release their most recent report on military procurement. This report today entitled "The Worst Procurement in the History of Canada," named after a quote by our current serving Defense Minister, Peter MacKay. I'm going to invite both of them to come up and present some remarks and the main findings of their report and talk about what possible options could be taken in this worst procurement in Canadian history. First, I'll invite Professor Michael Byers to the microphone. We'll have questions right afterwards. Michael.
Thank you, Steve. Merci, Steve. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui pour parler au sujet des hélicoptères qui ne sont pas en service aujourd'hui depuis 23 années des efforts des gouvernements canadiens. Canada's Sea King helicopters, our naval helicopters, are 50 years old this year. A decade ago, the Sea Kings were being described as flying coffins, and yet today they are still in service, still being flown by the brave men and women of the Canadian Forces who are forced to rely on these aging, decrepit aircraft, putting their lives at daily risk. The effort to replace the Sea Kings began 23 years ago when the Mulroney government signed a contract for EH-101 cormorants. 23 years ago since the contract was signed to replace the Sea Kings. And today, in February 2013, not a single replacement has arrived. Now just think about that. 23 years of failure to supply essential equipment to Canada's naval aviators. You will remember how in 1993, Jean Chrétien cancelled the EH-101 contract, having labeled the aircraft the Cadillac of maritime helicopters. Nothing happened during Mr. Chrétien's time as Prime Minister on this file. And it wasn't until he was replaced by Paul Martin that a new contract was signed for CH-148 Cyclones. That was 2004. 9 years ago. And for 9 years now, those helicopters, which were due initially to be delivered in 2005, those helicopters have not arrived. Now, there are several reasons for the delay. One is that the Government of Canada signed a contract for a helicopter that was still in the design phase, that had never been built. The Cyclone does not exist in fully operational form. It never has. It may never exist. For all we know, it was a plan on paper. And contracting for a helicopter that was still in the design phase proved to be a very serious mistake. An additional problem that added to the delays was that the Department of National Defense, after the procurement was approved, proceeded to add additional equipment requirements onto the aircraft, new electronics, new armaments, essentially Canadianizing the helicopter, adding expense and crucially adding weight. And so the helicopter under design, the Cyclone, all of a sudden had become too heavy for the engines that had been proposed for the Cyclone, which meant that Sikorsky had to go back and come up with a new, more powerful engine. And the new and more powerful engine in turn required that the entire helicopter be re-engineered. And so over the course of the last 9 years, and particularly the last 6 or 7 years, when this file has been overseen by the Harper government, the Department of National Defense has engaged in a massive pileup of incompetence in respect of its relationship with Sikorsky, adding new requirements onto a helicopter that required the entire aircraft to be redesigned. And as a result of this request for additional equipment, the added weight, the need for new engines, the full re-engineering of the aircraft, Sikorsky is now 8 years behind the initial delivery date, and should in theory be subject to some pretty significant penalties being imposed by the Government of Canada. But the Government of Canada finds itself reluctant to impose any penalties because a significant cause for the delay were the actions of the Department of National Defence in requesting new equipment. So the two parties, the Government of Canada and Sikorsky, are now staring at each other, almost playing a game of chicken. Sikorsky threatened with the possibility of penalties, but the Government of Canada threatened with the possibility of a massive lawsuit. And still, no helicopters have been delivered. It's in this circumstance that Stewart, Webb, and myself have not only chronicled this sad history of this failed delivery, the worst procurement in the history of Canada, to quote Defence Minister Peter MacKay. We've not only chronicled that sad history, but we've also made some specific recommendations as to how the Government of Canada could begin to clean up this mess. The first recommendation, very simple, is that the government provide full transparency on this file so that the public can judge the appropriateness of any approach to dealing with the crisis. Our second recommendation is that the government get tough with Sikorsky regarding the overdue and over-budget CH-148 Cyclone by actually imposing the late penalties and refusing further top-up funding. Now, we realize that Sikorsky may threaten a lawsuit, and we feel that Canada should therefore play other cards that it has at its disposal. And this leads to our recommendation 3, that the government commence an accelerated review of off-the-shelf alternatives without further delay, so as to be in a position to negotiate a new contract with another supplier in the event of a continued failure by Sikorsky to fulfill its obligations. We don't like having to make this recommendation, but there's an urgency, an emergency here to replace 50-year-old Sea Kings. The government is proving unable to address that emergency with Sikorsky. It needs to get tough with Sikorsky. It will not have any strong negotiating position with Sikorsky unless it's prepared to contemplate ripping up the contract and going for an alternative off-the-shelf, readily available helicopter. So we feel it's time that the Government of Canada, as it has done with the F-35 procurement, immediately begin to consider other options, to develop urgently a Plan B. And my colleague Stewart Webb will now explain that there are at least 4 alternative helicopters, proven helicopters, off-the-shelf helicopters available to address this procurement emergency, and we urge the Government of Canada to look at these alternatives and to proceed without further delay. Again, the brave men and women of the Canadian Forces are flying in 50-year-old Sea Kings. Their lives are at risk. The government has had 7 years on this file and has done almost nothing. It's time to move fast. Stewart.
Thank you, Dr. Byers. Good morning. As Dr. Byers said, we have 4 alternatives. We've taken a look at the Statement of Operational Requirements, and we've identified these. First is the MH-60R Seahawk, built by Sikorsky, and currently serves with the U.S. Navy, platform on destroyers, cruisers, and aircraft carriers. The operational radius of the Seahawk is approximately 417 kilometers, which is comparable to the current Sea Kings and the Cyclone. It has an external cargo hook capable of carrying 6,000 pounds, which is more than right now the current Sea Kings of 5,000. The main drawback of adopting the Seahawk is that the design is based on the Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk, which currently operates with the U.S. Army. However, the fact that the United States has adopted this helicopter for its Navy means that it should be considered. The the Danish military has recently selected the Seahawk for the Maritime Forces, and as it's being built by Sikorsky, there is the option that the Canadian government might be able to opt in for this option and not suffer as many penalties as it could incur. Another is the AW101, which used to be the EH101, now built by AgustaWestland. It has improved performance since its initial delivery and could be a contender for the Canadian Maritime Helicopter Project as it was before. If the AW1 were chosen, it might bring certain cost benefits in regards of training, mechanics and air crews, flexibility of stationing, search and rescue, and naval helicopters, as the Canadian forces already have adopted this helicopter for search and rescue. The AW101 has an operational range of 650 kilometers, significantly greater than the 450 kilometers for the Cyclone, and also can carry 10,000 pounds for its external cargo hook. The NH90, built by NH Industries, which is a consortium of Eurocopter, AgustaWestland, and Fokker Aerostructures, and has already been serviced for the French, Italian, Netherlands, and has currently been selected by Belgium, and where it has also replaced the Sea King and the Sea Lynx. It has an operational radius of 600 kilometers, and its cargo hook is capable of 8,800 pounds. The aircraft is also made out of corrosion-proof composite materials and has a very useful rear ramp, and is also being currently considered by Germany and Norway. Finally, the Eurocopter EC-725 Super Cougar. It's already been in service since 2005 and has proven versatility in operating naval groups and also in Afghanistan. The Super Cougar has an operational radius of 650 kilometers and a main gearbox that will have a dry run capability for 52 minutes. The external cargo hook is capable of over 10,000 pounds. It has emergency flotation rating up to Sea State 6, which is more than the statement of operational requirements, which has only 3 as a requirement. The significant drawback of the Super Cougar is that its tail rotor does not fold, which makes storage difficult on board Canadian surface fleet. And as we said, we've taken a look at the Statement of Operational Requirements, which was dated for 1999. So that dated SOR has allowed the government to add on more additional requirements, equipment for what's known as requirements creep. And there might be more than 4 options, but these are the 4 options that we've laid out and that our allies already have employed on their ships. So thank you very much. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Michael Byers and Stewart Webb. We're now open for any questions, if anyone has any.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, how do you get to the systemic problem here, which seems to be defense officials kind of lowball estimates, or they kind of, jig their bid in a way to kind of misrepresent, it seems anyway, to misrepresent what they're looking for or what their needs are, and then we end up in this situation over and over again.
Well, you're right that we end up in this situation over and over again. And I think the answer to the problem is much more stringent oversight by elected politicians over the Department of National Defense, not just at the initial approval stage, but at every stage of the procurement moving forward. And we haven't seen that on this file. We saw problems with the F-35s. We've got problems with the fixed-wing search and rescue aircraft procurement. What is happening is an initial approved procurement, and then DND adding bells and whistles on, which are post-approval, but add expense, add complexity, and in the case of the Cyclone have necessitated an entire re-engineering of the aircraft. So this is